pretend to wear funny clothes and try to bring the past to life. And for 36 years in the classroom, I used living history to try to hook my kids into the subject and not have them feel like the subject was as dead as the people we were studying. Well, I'm no longer in the classroom, and I'm repurposing myself, putting to use that room full of garb that I have at home, and my passion for bringing the past to life, which is still there, a desire to preserve landmarks, and a desire to play history detective. And so what I'm engaged in is a very pretentious sounding mission, Odyssey. It's kind of a personal pilgrimage. I'm visiting each of the sites that were concerned with Alta California, the Mission era, and a bit later. And I'm doing it in garb. And I'm trying to tell the story of each place and document the experience. So where I'm going today is Mission Nuestra Señora de Soledad, and I've just left Mission San Antonio de Padua. And we'll see how much I fit into this video, because I realize I talk a lot. So I hope you'll stick with me. September 26th, 1769. On his way to search for Monterey Bay, Governor Portola led his expedition down into a broadening valley. And the first couple of days, the expedition found very little in the way of forage. A lot of the grassland had been burned off. They didn't really know the reason why. They continue moving forward, and by the 29th, they managed to find some pasturage that isn't burned, and some Native Californians approach them, and there's discussion about what they're saying, and Father Crespi writes that the only word he was able to make out sounded like Soledad, the word for solitude. In 1771, when Padre Serra came through the area, he asked a young woman her name. He also seemed to only hear the word Soledad. It wasn't until 2 decades later, on October 9th, 1791, that Padre Lasuen dedicated Mission Nuestra Señora de la Soledad. Took a year to build a rough church. Took 6 years before they built another one. And it wasn't until 1803 that, even though there were founding missionaries here, it wasn't until 1803 that Padre Florencio Ibanez ended up being assigned to the mission, and he would be the only priest that remained here long term. 15 years of his life were spent here. Most of the other priests that were assigned got out as soon as they could. Maybe what took so long in the construction of the first chapel was there were comparatively few Indians in that immediate region. There were only 11 converts that were reported as a result of the efforts of the first year. That temporary church was constructed in 1791, and the first annual report was issued in 1794. No mention of construction on ranchos or outlying areas was made in that report, but there was an unusual baptism that was recorded in that the recipient was a 20-year-old man who was the son of Nootka parents, natives of northern Vancouver Island in British Columbia. Maybe some of the reluctance had to do with one of the founding padres, Padre Diego Garcia, who was very unhappy being at the mission and Those notes coincided with a period of harsh drought conditions, contributing a lot to accusations of deprivation and abuse of the neophytes by Padre Garcia's critics. Since few natives were around to do the work the Padres intended, recruitment started. And even though this was founded on an excellent site, what ended up happening is the Padres went looking towards the mountains and towards the Big Sur area, where they found a lot of excellent, and they moved them to the mission. They had them relocate. They also did the same thing with a number of the Salinans who were working over at Mission San Antonio. So they were brought here. And in time, Ohlone were also brought from the north. They got transplanted here. And over time, Yokuts were brought in, and so were some Miwok. And they were intermarrying, and so you're seeing cultures basically being obliterated. In 1805, the main church was enlarged from the 1797 one. The church was originally located at the east end of the Padres' quarters until 1824, when it was destroyed in one of the recurring floods of the Salinas River that plagued this hard-luck mission. A chapel was built to replace it. In 1828, it happened again, and reconstruction began. And again, in 1832, yet another flood destroyed what was being rebuilt. This was the turning point from which the mission had only recently partially recovered. This was replaced by a simple adobe chapel built in 1832 and got reconstructed in 1954. And it's at the opposite end of the compound. This is what we see today. This wasn't a chapel built from scratch. Originally, this was a storehouse which survived the flood of 1832, and it was converted into a chapel. By the way, it's going to be reconstructed in 1954. And you'll see, like on the inside, the designs are simple wall stencils. There are original oil paintings of the Stations of the Cross, but they're keeping it simple, maybe because they had to keep rebuilding. Neophyte housing was located across from the convento or Padres' quarters and across the Camino Real. The Camposanto or cemetery was nearby. And this might be the time to talk about the Neophyte population. At the end of the mission's 9th year, 1800, there were 512 Neophytos living in Mission Nuestra Señora de la Soledad. 2 years later, a severe epidemic hit, killing many, causing many others to flee in fear. Despite the epidemic, by 1805 there were 727 people, 688 of them neophytes, at Soledad Mission. But by 1810 the population began to drop. With the exception of Mission La Purísima, which was built in linear form, and that was only because of severe earthquakes, the missions tended to be built as quadrangles, partially for defensive purposes, and there would be usually just one opening into the quadrangle. And you'll notice that the neophytes, their quarters are outside the quadrangle. The south wall of the quadrangle was the convento or Padres' quarters, which was also where the guests of the Padres stayed. There may have been a portico on the inside of the quadrangle, but in order to find out, the sidewalk which was installed will have to be removed. The east side had the 3 previous versions of the chapel, which had been destroyed by the floods of 1824, 1828, and 1832. They were most likely to be 2-story structures. North of the chapel was a granary. The north side of the quadrangle was where many of the workshops, such as the carpentry, were located. These are the only original adobe walls left, or their remnants. They had to be covered over in order to keep them from dissolving because of the rains. The west wing, which contained the only entryway into the quadrangle, How's the grist mill? Probably another 2-story structure. And the smithy. Okay, Mission Soledad has way too much stuff for me to explore in one video. So, I'm going to be coming back. I hope you stick with me on my journey.